The Blaze Radio Network. On demand.
The best of the Glenn Beck Program.
What is it with Elon Musk and the Thai cave dweller heroes?
Yeah.
Is it
ill-advised tweets, maybe?
Maybe. But it's deeper than that. There's he's I don't know what's going on with this. If you don't know, he tweeted this weekend that one of the, quote, heroes was, quote, most likely a child molester.
Well, he said he was a pedophile guy. A pedo guy.
A pedo guy. Okay, so he was basically he's a pedophile.
That's what he was implying, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And when he was called on it, he said, I'll bet you $1 with my signature on it that it's true. Okay.
And it seemed to have started because this guy called into question his submarine that he brought over there.
Yeah.
And the guy said that it was just a publicity stunt on the part of Elon Musk, and that had no chance of ever working out. And I think that pissed off Elon a little bit.
Yeah.
And so he called him a pedo guy.
You might not want to jump right to
you might not want
pedophile,
yeah, maybe
or child molester. You may not want to jump right to that, Elon. It might be hazardous to your bank account, just slightly.
Glenn Beck.
Prince Charles and Prince William refused to attend a reception held by Queen Elizabeth for Donald Trump. Refused. This is a highly unusual occurrence. People who watch these kinds of things, wow, they need a life. But the people who watch these kinds of things say they can't remember the last time that the Queen went something like this unaccompanied. She was left alone with the Trumps, and God only knows what could have happened. But apparently, the prior engagements, Prince Charles had a police event, and William took part in a polo match.
Oh, well, obviously then you can't. I mean, you can't interrupt your polo match for the President of the United States, leader of the free world.
No.
These guys are big lefties. You know they hate him with a passion.
Well, I mean, between the Duke of Edinburgh, who believes literally that people are akin to a virus. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're big time lefties. Big time lefties.
It's amazing to me how Britain has treated this president when they fell all over Barack Obama. They loved Barack Obama.
Barack Obama hated them.
Hated the British. Kenya was a British colony, and his family, up to and including his dad, infected him with an incredible, deep-seated hatred for colonialism and for the British Empire. He hated the British. One of his first acts was to send back the bust of Winston Churchill.
Yeah, in an incredible slap in the face. I mean, the press is making such a big deal out of, oh my gosh, look at what Donald Trump said about Theresa May and Brexit. Yeah. You remember that Donald Trump gave the prime minister the bust back and said, "Here, take this with you." You remember that? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's there couldn't be a bigger slam than that. This is on global policy. That was on I hate you and your customs.
Yeah.
And your people.
Yeah.
Your history.
And yet they fell all over him.
Yeah.
All over. They just invited the Obamas to the royal wedding. The Harry and Markle thing. Jeez. It's agonizing. Mm. Whereas, Trump, I mean, he's
probably a fan.
I'm sure he's a fan.
Yeah.
He's indelicate. There's maybe some things he shouldn't have said to the British press as he's coming into the country to spend time with Theresa May.
Right.
But I think at least he's a friend to the Brits.
Yeah, I mean, and he's got gold in his house. They have gold in their house.
Right.
They have a lot in common. They all have those really uncomfortable old chairs. I mean, you look at think of Donald Trump's house. and think, is there a chair in that house that you're like, oh, man, I could just sit all day in that chair and
There's
read?
not one.
Nope, not one. Think of Buckingham Palace.
Same thing.
Same thing. Same thing. There's not a chair in either of their house. They have a lot in common. Where Barack Obama, what did he have? And did he even really have that? Or did he get that from his dad?
The
hatred.
I think it was one of the dreams from his father. The hatred of the British. His father fought hard against the British Empire.
You can kind of understand it.
You can.
My father fought hard for the use of real butter. And I got that from
very similar situation.
I got that from my dad.
Right,
I got this love for butter.
You got that right from your dad.
From my dad. He was like, no margarine, not in this house, not in our bakery. We use real ingredients.
And that was a long time ago, too, when people thought it was healthier.
He took a stand
That's
against
powerful.
that. And it was, I know you better, but some people might think you're mocking, but I know you understand. For instance, imagine a world without colonialism.
I can imagine that. That's
right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Imagine a world without butter.
No, that's inconceivable.
No, whose dad was more right?
Yours was.
I mean, and colonialism is just kind of going out. It's just out of fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Butter, they
Never.
tried to shove it out.
They did.
They won't.
And it's made a really strong comeback.
Yeah.
It really has.
Yeah.
Even though it's not really good for you, we now acknowledge it's at least better for you than the other thing they came up with, the margarine.
It's like if you have, think of bread.
Mm-hmm.
Good, fresh bread right out of the oven, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
It's delicious.
Do you eat it if there's no butter in the house?
I do not.
I do not.
I go get butter.
I go
and
get
I
butter.
bring it back to the house, then I eat it.
Bread is nothing more than a butter delivery system. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Yes.
So
some would add jam as well. It's a butter and jam delivery system.
Well, if you want to get fancy.
Yeah. And
if you
I
want to
do.
get fancy.
So I think you're right. I think your dad was smarter than Barack Obama's dad. And more relevant, frankly.
I think so. You got to remember, what are you passing on to your kids? A hatred of colonialism or a love of butter? Which is more important? I say
We've
love over
established
hate every time.
Every time.
Love over hate. Love over hate. Did you see that they're really upset about Donald Trump sitting in Winston Churchill's chair?
Yes. He did look arrogant in that chair, but he doesn't have any
He looked like Donald Trump.
I know. That's the only look he
Show
has.
me a picture. It is. Resting nasty face. He has resting arrogant face.
He does.
Always looks arrogant.
He does.
Did you see him sitting in that chair? How arrogant? No, I looked at him like, no, I looked like Donald Trump.
And the headline was, "How dare you? Since when do you people care about Winston Churchill? You hated him. You hated him before the war. You hated him kind of during the war, and you really hated him after the war.
You tossed him out twice.
Yeah.
Twice you tossed him out of Parliament because, I don't know, he had a thing against the Nazis, and you didn't want to hear it. Then during the war, oh, please save us, Winston. Oh, please save us. The minute, almost to the minute.
Yeah.
The minute the war was over, they voted him out.
See ya.
It's incredible.
And now they're all indignant because Donald Trump sat in his chair. Shut up. Shut up. Don't make us come over there and dog slap you again, because we'll do it. We'll do it. You want us to give you something to cry about?
We'll give you something to
cry about.
Are you concerned at all that we're both kind of mad at England today, but anxious to see what happens with Vladimir Putin? I think that might be a concern. It could be a concern that we're like that. Everybody in America, half the country is. Oh, by the way, did you see? Speaking of half of the country, the New York Times. Did you see what the New York Times said about Donald Trump's meeting with NATO?
No.
Oh, I have to. Where is it? I have it here someplace. Oh, I have to read it to you exactly. You know what? Let me take a break. I'll come back. I have to read it exactly as written from the New York Times. How was Donald Trump's trip with NATO? How'd that work out? How do you think the New York Times reported that?
The way you're setting it up now, I'm thinking maybe in a positive light.
Okay. Well,
Glenn Beck.
So here is the editorial from the New York Times editorial board. This is their editorial. Ready? Trump got from NATO everything Obama ever asked for.
Wow.
Let me quote the New York Times. Now that the smoke is cleared from the NATO summit meeting, the most tangible result is apparent. President Trump advanced President Barack Obama's initiative to keep the allies on track to shoulder a more equitable share of NATO's costs. Mr. Trump even signed on to a tough statement directed at Russia. For once, he saw eye to eye with his predecessor. For once, he saw eye to eye. Yeah, but his predecessor couldn't get it done, could he? That's amazing.
It's almost impossible to believe. Are you sure that's not some satirical website claiming to be the New York Times?
No, it's New York Times.
Jeez.
Tremendous progress has been made. Everyone agreed to substantially up their commitment. They're going to up it at levels they've never seen before, Trump said. Commitments were made. The commitment was at 2%. Ultimately, that will be going up quite a bit higher than that.
Yeah, they didn't exactly agree to 4, right? Which is what he was asking. He was asking for 4%.
Right.
And I think they're going to do 3 or...
Their 2% is the deal.
Yeah.
You know, I personally just think, all right, well, we'll be at 2%. Why are we doing 8? Why are we doing 5? Why are we doing 3.5? It's 2.
Yeah.
They've never paid 2. We've never paid less than 3.5. The contract says 2. We should pay 2.
We do the same thing with the UN. We foot that whole load too.
Well, and that one, I know what we get from NATO. That one, I just don't know what we get.
Completely worthless.
There was also an interview with Donald Trump, and last week he said some good things, and I thought maybe, he was.
We applauded him for what he said about Putin.
You got to take the good with the bad, or you got to take the bad with the good, and there's been some good. Last week there was some real good. Today this has come out. Listen to this.
The Russians who were indicted. Would you ask Putin to send them here?
Well, I might. I hadn't thought of that, but I'll be asking about it.
Maybe you don't volunteer that either.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that.
I hadn't thought of that.
Wait, you hadn't thought of that?
Your Justice Department on Friday, they just indicted these people on Friday. Did you know that?
Strange.
Yeah, that's really strange.
Let's keep that in our inside voice.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought of that. Indictment. Who's been in? What is?
When?
I didn't know. Really?
Again, this was during the Obama administration. They were doing whatever it was during the Obama administration.
Stop. This is confusing to me. This is the Obama administration. This happened during the Obama. Yes. And you found out about it during your administration. I mean, it's like, hey, they were doing it then, not now. Yeah, no, they're still doing it.
Yeah.
They're still doing it.
And I heard that they were trying, or people were trying to hack into the RNC, too, the Republican National Committee.
Wait.
But we had much better defenses. I've been told that by a number of people. We had.
He's heard it. He's been told that by a number of people.
Wait.
Like there was the barista who told him that. 7-Eleven clerk said it.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, where... I love how he just throws this stuff out.
I heard. Mr. President.
Nobody has access to more information than you.
You can get all information. I heard from CNBC. I heard from the guy who opened my car door the other day that, Mr. President, do you get a briefing? I know you get one. And unlike your predecessor, you attend them. Are you listening?
Again, you take the bad with the good.
Yes.
There was some good last week.
Much better defenses, so they couldn't. I think the DNC should be ashamed of themselves for allowing themselves to be hacked. They had bad defenses, and they were able to be hacked. But I heard they were trying to hack the Republicans, too. But, and this may be wrong, but they had much stronger defenses.
Wait.
And it may be wrong.
Wait, it may be wrong?
Wait,
what?
what?
Why are you saying it? What is happening? Mr. President, you have the NSA and the CIA and the FBI. You've got access. You could call them at any time. I can't. You can. I've heard, and it might be wrong. No.
Who's your biggest competitor, your biggest foe globally right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. No, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe.
Oh, boy.
Oh, no.
You can't call Russia a competitor and the European Union a foe.
No, honey. No.
Again, you take the bad with the good.
Let's see what happens today, because he's with Putin today. And
it might be good.
Maybe we get out of Syria today. Who knows?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Who knows?
Glenn Beck.
A couple weeks ago, we had Selena Zito on and Brad Todd. They authored the book, The Great Revolt, Inside the Populist Coalition, Reshaping American Politics. And I learned so much about the supporters of Donald Trump that you just don't hear anywhere. For instance, a good number of Trump supporters are what used to be called Reagan Democrats. These are Trump Democrats. These are the people that voted Democrat, voted for Barack Obama, and have had enough and have left their party to come over and vote for Donald Trump. And they are very vocal supporters. How come we don't hear about that? Why is it just the evil Republicans that you hear of? And a lot of Trump support's coming not from Republicans, but from the people who have never voted, haven't voted since Ross Perot. How come we didn't hear that? Brad Todd joins us now. He's the guy who did all of the research. Hello, Brad. How are you?
I'm great, Glenn. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I just wanted to drill down a little bit more into some of the research and what you found, so you can kind of help us out and set the record straight on who is the Trump coalition.
Sure. Well, we conducted our research both quantitatively and qualitatively. We did a survey of 2,000 Trump voters in the 5 Midwestern states that flipped, geographically stratified to reflect the actual distribution of Trump's vote. And then we traveled. Selena, as you know, is famous for taking back roads and living on the road in small town America and industrial America, and interviewed hundreds of people. End up with profiles of about 24 people who we say represent 7 archetypes of the Trump coalition. Now, they're not every person in the Trump coalition represented in one of those 7 archetypes, but most of them are. And some of them are people, like you say, who came off the sidelines. We call them the shock troops of American democracy, those voters who only get interested once in a blue moon, but when they do, they radically change the composition of the electorate. And that happened in Trump's case, both in the Republican nominating process and in the general election. In Pennsylvania, which has a closed primary, you have to change your registration to participate in the other side's primary. You had 30,000 voters change their registration to go from Democrat to Republican to go vote in the Republican primary. Well, Donald Trump ends up only winning Pennsylvania by 70-something thousand voters in the general. So presumably, most of that 30,000 group of voters who were coming in to help him in the primary stuck with him in the general. These things make real differences numerically. You also, find in the book, if you pick up the book for The Great Revolt, you'll see some people one woman who didn't register to vote until she was 70. Trump was the first candidate for president she's ever voted for. Didn't mean she didn't care about national affairs. It's just she didn't think that anyone was different enough to make a difference in politics. And that element is often lost of this voter that Trump brought in, and by the way, those voters are among the least ideological of Trump's coalition, the least conservative. They're the most secular in Trump's coalition. They're people who saw in him something that was different from most people in politics. And I read media accounts all the time, Glenn, of editorials who say, we need more people to vote. We need higher participation in elections. Well, in 2016, you got it.
What percentage of Trump voters is that?
I think it's about 6, based on our look at the data. 5, somewhere in the, that's a little bit, obviously we can't be quite that precise, but somewhere in the 5 to 7% range. But that's a pretty large portion of an electorate in an election where Donald Trump only wins, those states in the Midwest by just a handful of votes. Michigan flips and Wisconsin flipped with 10,000 votes. Pennsylvania flips with 70,000 votes. So 5% 5 to 7% is a pretty big number.
You said that this new populism, if you will, is actually a movement against bigness. What does that mean?
Yes. Well, there was a time in American politics when populism meant you were against Wall Street and big economic powers. That's the way we've understood populism, both in the 1800s and again in the 20s. That's different now because government now is just as large a threat to people's everyday lives as the big economic powers are. In fact, big tech, the tech industry, that has so much of our information that sells it, doesn't tell us how it's selling it, doesn't tell us how it's monetizing what it knows about us. The tech industry is also a threat. The media, which has become so homogenous at the mainstream level, and you can't find a newsroom that's ideologically diverse in America anymore. And so, therefore, today, the proper understanding of populism in today's culture is not just the skepticism of big corporations. And by the way, Trump's voters were skeptical of big corporations. 3/4 of them say that big corporations don't care about what happens to the little guy when they make their decisions. That's a pretty high skepticism for the free market party. But you also have populism also incorporates skepticism of big government, big tech, big entertainment, big media. And that's why the coalitions have shifted. When populism was only a skepticism of large corporations, it fit well within the Democratic coalition, especially when that coalition was dedicated to economic equality ostensibly. The politics of Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, sort of the New Deal, Fair Deal Democratic Party, where it's very focused on economics and very focused on the working class. Today's Democratic Party is not focused on economic equality at all. It's all about multicultural militancy. And so that leaves little room for populism's basis, which is the look out for the little guy against the big guy. But it's also now incompatible with the Democratic homage to big government, big media, big entertainment, big tech. Those are all Democratic constituencies. So you can't quite be a populist and sit there.
I just wrote a new book that's coming out in September called Addicted to Outrage. And in it, I talk about multiculturalism, that everybody's being called a racist today. And it's not racism, it's multiculturalism. We don't have a problem with different races as much as we do. I mean, I can't say that, we don't. There's no one in America that's racist. Of course, that's not true. But that's not the overwhelming problem. The real problem is this multiculturalism, where we are dividing and dividing and dividing into all of these little groups. And a lot of them, by dividing us like this, means we're losing the American culture. And once you say that, then you're called a racist again. Is this what you found?
It also goes to there's something to that. It also goes to the thought police notion. The notion that the Democrats now believe that free speech and freedom of religion are counter to their agenda. Not all.
We lose you? Hello? Whoa, that was weird. Oh, my gosh. It's AI. It's taken over. We thought we were talking to Brad Todd. We're not. We were talking to somebody in big tech, an AI in big tech. That's clearly what happened. Either that or there was some sort of glitch. If he doesn't call back, we're going to take a break. If he doesn't call back, it's Mark Zuckerberg behind the whole thing. So there you go. You got that. Talking to Brad Todd. He is the co-author of the book, The Great Revolt, the Populist Coalition Reshaping American Politics. he says, surprisingly, I'm being sarcastic there, that the Trump coalition is not who the mainstream media wants you to believe they are. Welcome back to the program, Brad.
Brad,
Thanks, Glenn.
My perception of what's gone on the last 2 years is that Republicans and Democrats have just switched places. Republicans, who were always leery and nervous about Putin and Russia, are now completely fine because it seems that their perception is Trump is fine with them. Whereas Democrats, who continually said, yeah, he's not a threat, that's old school, the 80s called and wants their policy back, they're now out of their minds afraid of Putin, and they think we should. I mean, is that an accurate portrayal of what's happened? Is it just the R and the D that matter and no principles anymore?
No, you know what I think it is I think it's differing perceptions of Trump and different trust levels of Trump. There are a lot of Republicans who think that Trump is just such an America firster. You know, Trump resists almost all multilateral alliances, and so therefore they then give him plenty of rope to interact on the world stage and sort of what they would perceive as negotiate, sort of move our posture for purposes of getting something better. I think that meanwhile Democrats wouldn't trust Trump to make a peanut butter sandwich, and so therefore, they much less negotiate with another world leader. And so I think it's really not really changed perceptions of Russia. Most Republicans, most conservatives, most populists I've talked to still believe that Vladimir Putin's a KGB bully. He's a ruthless guy who doesn't have America's interest at heart. And I think Republican voters will cheer hardline policies on Russia, but I think that they also will give President Trump, an ample amount of rope to maneuver.
How much, Brad? How much of? I explained this on Friday as the way the O.J. Simpson trial went down. Me as a white man, I didn't understand the frustration of fair trials or the system just so corrupt. I didn't understand that. And so when I saw, African Americans celebrating his release, I couldn't understand it at all. Now they're saying, African Americans, you've polled them now, and they're like, oh, yeah, O.J. Simpson, absolutely guilty. But they were not rooting for him. They were rooting for anybody to beat the system. Is that true? Does that play a role into the Trump voter now?
There is no question about it. As you mentioned earlier, a lot of Trump voters voted for President Obama. In our survey of Trump voters in the 5 Rust Belt states in the Great Revolt, 21% of the Trump voters in those 5 Rust Belt states voted for Obama, and 9% voted for him twice. It's this, and by the way, he couldn't win without it. You go look at Barack Obama's margins in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. There were more than enough Obama voters there for Hillary to win and win with ease, but she couldn't keep the Obama coalition together. So
are they? Are those people concerned about the Democrats taking such a hard left, or did they just like Donald Trump?
Well, there's a little bit of both things there. I mean, they tipped that. The part they liked about Donald Trump is that he wasn't much of a Republican.
Yeah.
These are voters who've long resisted Republicans, even though that Republicans agree with them more on religiosity, on the issues of life, on the issues of guns. They've sort of agreed with Republicans on a lot of hot button issues for years, but they've resisted becoming Republicans.
Yeah.
And we throughout our interviews in the book, you listen to people, they say, oh, the Republicans are the country club party. They're the people for the rich. They're the insiders.
Yeah.
Trump wasn't the insider.
The name of the book is The Great Revolt. Brad Todd, thanks.
Glenn Beck.
Right now, the president is meeting on the other side of the planet with Vladimir Putin. People think they know who Vladimir Putin is. There's one guy who actually knows who he is. He's been the number one enemy of Vladimir Putin for the last 10 years. In fact, it's because of him that Russia and Putin's people were meeting in the Trump Tower with Donald Trump before the election. It's because of him there is such a thing called the Magnitsky Act. His name is Bill Browder, and he wrote a letter to the president, and it is the cover of the New York Times right now. Bill is on the phone with us to kind of go over some advice for the president. Bill, how are you, sir?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
What is it like to be the number one enemy of arguably the most dangerous man on the planet?
Well, I think there are probably better things to be than that, but this wasn't something that I chose. That this was something that happened because of what Putin did. Putin. The reason that I'm an enemy of Vladimir Putin is that he and his cronies killed one of my colleagues and friends, a young man named Sergei Magnitsky, who was a lawyer working for me in Russia, after Sergei uncovered a massive government corruption scheme and thought, as a patriot, he would expose it. Instead, Putin's henchmen arrested him, tortured him for 358 days, and killed him 8.5 years ago. And I've been on a mission to get justice for Sergei, which has led to, as you mentioned, the Magnitsky Act, which imposes asset freezes and visa sanctions on Putin and his cronies for a variety of crimes, including killing Sergei. And because Putin is a kleptocrat, he's a guy who steals money from his people in large quantities, and he keeps that money in the West, he feels completely exposed by this piece of legislation. And in response to that, he's tried to have the legislation repealed, as you mentioned, sending his emissaries to Trump Tower, and also trying to destroy me and all the people around me. And most recently, he tried to use Interpol to arrest me in Madrid. I was arrested for a brief period of time on a Russian Interpol arrest warrant about a month ago. Putin's playing for keeps. He's a cold-blooded killer. He's a dangerous man. And I'm very worried about any of these attempts to somehow placate him or appease him that are taking place with the president right now in Helsinki.
One more personal question, then I want to go to Helsinki. Why are you still alive?
Well, Putin is a killer. He kills at home. He kills abroad. The one thing he doesn't like to do is face consequences for his crimes. And he hasn't figured out a way of killing me and doing it in a way that he can get away with. And so what they've tried to do instead of killing me abroad is having me arrested, taken back to Russia, and killing me in Russia, where he has full ability to get away with that. And so they're now on their seventh abusive attempt to use Interpol to have me arrested. I live in England, and they've tried a dozen times in various different ways to apply to the British police for mutual legal assistance. They're suing me all over the world. They're trying to do everything they can to get me back to Russia, to discredit me, to have me extradited, to impoverish me, to do whatever they can to destroy me, so that they can destroy me in a way that's plausibly deniable and doesn't put them in further sanctions or other political consequences.
Bill, you wrote an open letter to the president, and you said there are a few things you need to know about Putin, and I'd like to just go over them with you. First, Putin has a weak hand and is always bluffing.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So what do we have here? What is Russia? Russia is a country with an economy the size of the state of New York. Russia is a country with a military budget which is 90% less than the U.S. military budget. And that's assuming that whatever is in their military budget isn't being stolen. And I would bet that 80% of the military budget is being stolen. Russia is a country which is just a minnow in the world. It's not a serious player in any way, shape, or form. And so for us to be meeting with Putin on an equal level is just absurd. It doesn't make any sense. He's a pipsqueak in comparison with the United States. And so he's bluffing like hell. He's got this pair of twos, and the United States is a full house. And for anyone to sort of put them on an equal stage gives him an enormous amount of credibility, which he doesn't deserve.
Putin is a bald-faced liar.
So Putin, as we've seen, and this is not me making this assessment. This is his lies are legendary. Remember when he invaded Crimea? And he said, "No, these weren't our troops; they were little green men." When he shot down MH17, He said, no, it wasn't our missiles, it was the Ukrainians' missiles. When he cheated in the Olympics with doping, nobody cheated, even though there's like absolute documentary evidence of it. Everything, he said, we're going to get rid of chemical weapons in Syria. They've not done anything about chemical weapons in Syria. Putin lies, and then lies some more. Anything he says is a lie.
You said in your op-ed in Time, this open letter to President Trump saying, please, you have to keep in mind a few things. You said something that really connected with me. President George W. Bush famously looked into Putin in the eye, saw his soul. Last year, I had lunch with President Bush and asked him about it. In short, he said each of their dozen following meetings and conversations were disastrous. 2009, President Obama tried to clean up the situation by offering Russia a reset. That emboldened Putin even further. Now, Putin is meeting with President Trump. You say his views compromise, Putin's views compromise and engagement as a weakness.
So Putin. So every time you get a U.S. president, they all think, well, I'm the leader of the free world. Look how great I am. I can go and tame Vladimir Putin. And so Putin goes and meets with these people and gives them some sense that he can be tamed, and they feel like, wow, I'm so good and I'm so powerful. I'm going to tame this man. And then they come back with these experiences like what happened with George W. Bush and what happened with Barack Obama. And the same thing is going to happen with Trump. If he thinks that if he has any capacity to tame, to negotiate, and to come to any kind of terms with Vladimir Putin, he's sorely mistaken. Vladimir Putin will take whatever he's given in a negotiation, and that will be the starting point for the next negotiation. And these relationships never end up well. And there's one simple reason why they don't, which is because Putin can't afford to be friends with the United States. His whole spiel with the Russian people is to say, look at all even though we have trouble in our own country, even though the economy stinks, even though there's nothing good happening here, we've got all band together to fight against these foreign enemies, and America is our biggest foreign enemy. He has to say that, otherwise people are going to turn their attention to him. And so whatever Putin says or doesn't say, and he'll lie, of course, in that meeting, he has no intention of honoring whatever he might have agreed to. And that's been his pattern for 18 years. And for people to ignore that, or for anybody to ignore that, for President Trump to ignore that, he's doing it at his own peril.
Putin has said this morning that the Cold War is a thing of the past, but he has also said it was the biggest mistake of the 20th century, the way it ended with the collapse of the former Soviet Union. What is it that, do you think that Donald Trump gets any of what you've just said and understands? He called him a competitor last week, which I kind of liked, because I don't want to call people enemies, even though I believe he is an enemy. There's no reason to use that language until, well, I was going to say until it's official, but I guess it is official. Do you think that Donald Trump gets this at all on who he is?
Well, the whole policy, the Trump-Russia policy is confusing. On one hand, Trump makes these ridiculous statements saying that Putin is not a killer. I want to get along with him. He's a nice guy. And on the other hand, Trump has an administration full of totally clear-eyed people, right, who understand Russia better than anybody. And Pompeo, the Secretary of State, Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, Nikki Haley, the U.S. Ambassador in the United Nations, John Bolton. These are all people who understand exactly who Putin is and are tough as hell on Putin. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and I'm very conscious of this, that they've taken steps that are more tough on Russia than anything I've seen in a long, long time. In particular, when they went after Putin's oligarchs in April, and they sanctioned 7 of the richest oligarchs in Russia. And that they weren't just sanctioning Putin. I mean, they weren't just sanctioning the oligarchs; they were sanctioning Putin himself, because he took his money with some of those oligarchs.
So, what do you think Trump is doing?
Well, either he has some strange negotiating strategy, which doesn't make any sense to me, or it's all a big discombobulated mess in terms of his Russia policy. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. It's very schizophrenic. On one hand, I applaud it, which is the actual implementation of the policy. On the other hand, I abhor it when he says that Putin is not a killer. I know for a fact that Putin is a killer. And so
you actually compare him to Pablo Escobar.
Yes, he's an organized criminal on massive proportions. The only difference between Putin and Escobar is that Putin has got nuclear weapons. He's a gangster, a mafia gangster with nuclear weapons.
So what do you hope can come out of this? Is there anything that could happen today that you would say, okay, well, that was okay?
Well, if Trump gets tough on Putin and says that you should withdraw from Ukraine, you should not bomb any innocent women and children in Syria, that you will be eviscerated if you get involved in any kind of political meddling in the United States or our allied countries. If you continue to assassinate people using chemical weapons in our allied countries, then we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks. If he doesn't say that, then all this stuff is just completely empowering Putin to do
I don't see any of that happening. I see maybe Syria. I think he would like to wrap up Syria, but I don't think he cares about Ukraine, unfortunately. He was just over in England, but that was a little dicey. And I can't imagine him saying that, NATO is going to get tough on him if he doesn't stop killing people in NATO countries. But do you? I mean, do you see it?
So what I see is that there's effectively no upside to this summit. It shouldn't have happened. There's only downside. Waiting with bated breath to see what any public announcements are, to see to see how much damage is done and how that damage can be mitigated. It's dealing with Vladimir Putin is like dealing with a mafia gangster, and that's not the tone that this summit has been approached so far by President Trump.
How does Putin's Russia end, do you think?
Well, Putin is going to stay in place for as long as he can. He's not going to retire to the Putin Presidential Library and speeches. No, that's not going to happen. He has to stay in place because all of his money will be taken away. He'll probably go to jail and could even have worse things happen to him if he's no longer in power. And so he's going to stay in power until the very bitter end. And I say that the best comparable is what I call the Mugabe scenario. Mugabe was the president of Zimbabwe for like 30 years, and he just stayed and created more and more nationalism and more of a mess until the currency became worthless. Mm-hmm. The economy is, and that's Putin's only play here, and that's what he's going to do. And the worse the economy gets, the more angry and nationalistic he gets, and the more trouble he's going to cause in the rest of the world. And this is an absolute villainous character that needs to be contained. And anybody who knows him, including some very, very good people in the Trump administration, totally agree with me on this.
Bill, I wish you the best, and I pray for you and your family that you stay safe. I don't know how or why you would travel over to Europe and leave the safety of the United States, but we wish you all the best, and thanks for being on the program, and thank you for being brave enough to stand up. I mean, was there? Are you married, Bill?
I am. I don't like to talk about my family.
No. I just wanted to know. Was there ever a time that you and your wife, or that you just thought, man, I don't know if I can do this? I mean, you put up. The stakes are really high, and people don't do what you've done.
Well, what Putin and his cronies did to Sergei Magnitsky, my lawyer, they killed him as my proxy. He basically would be alive today if he hadn't been working for me, and they killed him as my proxy. And he stood up for me, and it's my duty to stand up for him. And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do that.
Wow.
So I will continue to fight Putin until the bitter end, and continue to call for justice for the murder of Sergei Magnitsky and many other people. And I'm not going to back down.
You are a very rare man, and it is a privilege to talk to you, Bill. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Wow. Keep him and his family in prayer. Holy cow. Would you do that, Pat? Think you'd have the guts?
I don't know.
I mean, that's...
You never know until you're there.
Until you're there.
I don't know.
Terrifying.
He's also painted kind of a bleak picture of what can come of this summit.
Yeah.
Pretty much believes nothing will. Nothing good.
Well...
Glenn Beck.
The best of the Glenn Beck Program.
Glenn Beck.
The best of the Glenn Beck Program.